Excellent. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to start by welcoming you here this evening for our SDAB hearing. The weather must have known that there was a hearing tonight, so it didn't want to make it bright and sunny and enjoyable for you out there. So you can enjoy it in here. So before we get going, I'd just like to go over a couple of housekeeping rules. So we do have a muster point. If we are required to evacuate, the muster point is located across the street at the Potter's Guild. So you would exit out council chambers and out the front door across the street. Bathrooms are located out the doors and to your right, down to the end of the hall on the left-hand side. A reminder, if you do have a cell phone on you, please silence your cell phone during the hearing. Depending on the amount of time that the hearing takes this evening, we may take a short recess. We will let you know if members require a recess. Please indicate that to the chair, and we'll be happy to do so to accommodate. And then just a quick note on the microphone. So for the panel as well as for anybody presenting, please make sure that you speak directly into the microphone. Don't worry too much about looking at us. Make sure you're speaking directly into that microphone, that's so it picks it up appropriately for the sound system, and that way everybody else in the chambers will be able to hear you speak as well. So my name is Justin Laurie. I am a councillor here in the town of Stony Plain, and I was appointed as the chair of the Subdivision Development and Appeal Board. And at this time, starting on my left, I will ask members of the board to make introductions.
Tim Mons, resident of Stony Plain, retired.
Hello, I'm Jennifer Badgery, resident of Stony Plain.
Laura Lee Johnson, resident of Stony Plain.
Nika Weingarten, resident of Stony Plain.
Excellent, thank you very much. And then I will go to administration. Administration, if you could please introduce yourself.
My name is Teresa Olson, and I'm the Subdivision and Development Appeal Clerk.
And I'm Christina Michaud. I'm the recording secretary.
Advisor for the town, and I also performed the review for this subject application.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Oh, you want to try that again?
Justin Young is my name. I'm the development supervisor with the town.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mr. Young. I'll just ask administration, are there any, go to any objections of the agenda package? So the agenda package was available online. I believe there were some copies as well available at the back, correct? None today? Okay. So the agenda package has been posted. I'll ask for the panel if there's any objections to the agenda package. Seeing none, thank you. Are there any additions, deletions, or changes to the agenda? None?
Through the chair, no, there isn't.
Thank you. Is there anyone present who wants to request a postponement of the hearing this evening? Seeing none, thank you very much. So from the SDAB, may I get a motion to adopt the agenda? Mr. Mons, thank you. I'll call the question. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Included in the agenda package would have been the minutes from the previous SDAB hearing that was held on May 4th, 2023, here in council chambers. I'm just going to ask, are there any errors or omissions noted from those minutes? Hearing none, then I'll ask for a motion to adopt the minutes from the previous hearing. Mr. Weingarten, thank you very much. Call the question. All those in favor? And that's carried unanimously. Excellent. Now that we have all the housekeeping out of the way, I will go through a brief outline of the hearing process for everyone in attendance so you can understand how this will kind of operate here this evening, and then we will get underway. So the hearing is a quasi-judicial hearing, and it will be conducted accordingly. This hearing can only consider evidence presented at this hearing, and the board cannot accept any presentations or letters after the close of this hearing this evening. The hearing is being recorded, and anything that is said during the hearing will become part of the permanent record. The board will hear from the Development Authority first. The board will hear the evidence from those affected by the appeal in the following order. We will hear from the appellant, or those opposed to the variance. We will then hear from those in favor of the appellant, also opposed to the variance. We will then hear from the applicant in favor of the variance. We will then hear from those in favor of the applicant and in favor of the variance. and then the applicant and the appellant may provide closing statements before the hearing is adjourned. After each person is done speaking, the board will have an opportunity to ask questions of that speaker. Please keep your presentations to a maximum of 5 minutes and speak clearly into the microphone. Depending on the number of speakers that we have in the presentations, we may ask that information and comments be kept to either additional or new information that the board has not yet heard. Please ensure that all comments are directed through the chair. And if your concerns have already been voiced by someone else, please limit your presentation to new evidence. If you have brought any notes or pictures or any other documents, please ensure that those are provided to the SDAB clerk to be inserted into the record and for copies to be provided for the board. And then we advise that the Subdivision Development and Appeal Board may uphold the decision of the Development Authority, which would deny the appeal, refuse the development permit, which would uphold the appeal, or add conditions to the development permit. With that process outlined, does anyone have any concerns to the process as stated? Seeing none, thank you very much. To the SDAB clerk, can you please announce the appeal?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am announcing the appeal of the conditional approval of a multi-unit dwelling and the following variances. 1, minimum dimensions for a 90-degree compact car parking space varied from 2.50 meters by 4.90 meters to 2.50 meters by 4.79 meters. Number 2, total amount of required parking stalls varied from 154 to 129. Number 3, maximum building height varied from 20.00 meters to 21.63 meters. Number 4, minimum west side lot line setback varied from 4.00 meters to 3.81 meters. And number 5, minimum required landscaped area varied from 20.00% of the site area to 16.32%. Development permit number 2023-D0001, located at 4300 South Park Drive, Lot B, Block 1, Plan 882-2417.
Excellent, thank you very much. And so before we get underway, I just have a couple of things that I have to ask. So to the appellant, the applicant, and the audience, does anyone object to any of the present board members, the SDAB clerk, or the recording secretary hearing this appeal? Seeing and hearing none. To the board members, have any of the board members been in contact with anyone affected by this appeal, visited the site in question, or feel they should be excused from this hearing for any other reason, such as conflict of interest or pecuniary interest? Seeing none, thank you very much. At this time, I will call upon the Development Authority to please proceed with their presentation.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's no specific presentation. I believe you have a written submission which outlines a detailed justification for the different variances. I would note that, you'll be able to see in that package that this application originally came in, I believe, in January of this year and was, recently approved. So that's indicative of a long period of time of back and forth with us and the applicant group. Undergoing a thorough review and ensuring a good quality development was what we got in the final product. There are significant hardships on the site, it being the last piece of land to be developed, and as such, it was determined that it is reasonable to provide some variances to facilitate the development. Of course, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have about the approval or any of the technical aspects.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So at this time then, I would like to ask the board if the board has any questions for the Development Authority. Mr. Weingarten, you may go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to administration. What is the area of the site to be developed?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Weingarten, the approximate area of the site is 2.7 hectares.
Any follow-up to that?
Yes,
Yep,
please.
Go ahead.
So
Sorry, apologies, 0.74 hectares. My apologies, yeah.
0.74 hectares. Through you to administration, Mr. Chairman. In the presentation by the Development Authority, they state that several rounds of review regarding the site design took place between the applicant and the town, resulting in the final proposed site plan, and size constraints and existing drainage patterns presented challenges. Based on these statements, is it fair to say that the development is really too large for the site?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Weingarten, no, that is not fair to say. The size of the development is proportional. I believe that the constraints and the specifically economical constraints of developing the site lend it to a higher density development. The zone in particular permits this style of development as a discretionary use, provided there's a commercial ground floor, which is something that the applicant has provided. I would also add that there's several details of the application that soften its impact and make it pedestrian friendly, connective, and it's an efficient use of the parcel.
Thank you.
Is that all, Mr. Weiner?
I've got a list of questions.
We'll kind of share them. We'll see. Anybody
you
else with
again.
questions? Okay, Mr. Weingarten, continue then.
Okay, then, thank you again through you to administration. Who owns the Sunrise Village Plaza parking lot?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Weingarten, I don't have a complete list of all the different owners. There are several parcels in there. There's shared ownership by many different entities.
So supplemental, so it's not a public parking lot, it's a private parking lot?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Weingarten, I would suggest that there's implied public access to the parking lot. It's parking that's provided for people to use the various commercial retail developments on site. So the public is allowed to access. Now, if you're asking if it's a piece of public infrastructure that the town owns, then the answer is no.
Okay, thank you. May I continue?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. Okay, so on drawing A10, it shows that the proposed development includes 45 stalls of underground parking and 84 stalls of above-ground parking. That's included with the proposed development. From drawing L1, I count only 43 new above-ground parking stalls to be constructed with the proposed development. So doing the arithmetic, that's a total of 88 new parking stalls to be constructed with the proposed development. That's 48 stalls short of what's required with the variance, and 66 stalls short according to the LUB regulations. Where are those additional stalls going to be located?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Weingarten, this may just be a misinterpretation of where the lot lines are. It's an irregular shaped lot, so some of the parking is built currently today. However, it is only fair to attribute parking which is located on their site to parking calculations for their use.
So the 129 parking stalls that, according to the variance, include existing parking that's in front of the Scotiabank and the Safeway store.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Weingarten, yes. Part of the parking that they are providing for their site for this development exists already. However, it is part of their site and should be applied to the calculation.
Okay, thank you. So again, if I may continue, how will the developer then ensure that patrons from the Safeway or the North Stony Dental don't park in the residents' parking stalls?
Sure. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Weingarten, they have no onus or responsibility to direct traffic flow or users of a parking lot. Their responsibility is to provide the facility and that is what the land use bylaw requires. There's nothing above and beyond that for them to try to correct or shape the behavior of operators. That would not be appropriate to apply as part of a development permit.
So as an 80-plus-year-old resident of the building, I could find myself having to park at Shoppers Drug Mart or at Codfodder's Restaurant and then having to walk to my building to get to my residence?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Weingarten, I would assume that the operators, just through intending to provide a good quality service and development for their community, will provide assigned parking. And additionally, they have an underground parkade that's not going to be accessible by the public. So I don't share the concern that residents won't have a place to park.
No, I'm not concerned that they won't have a place to park. I'm concerned about how far they have to walk to get from their parked vehicle to their building. If they have to park at Codfodder's, they got to walk all the way from the south end to the north end of that lot.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Weingarten, I don't share that concern. In detailed discussions with the operators and the developers, I'm certain that they intend to provide parking for their residents, which would be easily accessible to them.
Thank you.
Any further questions, Mr. Weingarten?
Yes, please.
I'm just going to check with the other members and see if anybody
Sure.
else has any questions first, and then we can continue. Any questions? Jen, any questions? No? Okay, Mr. Weingarten, you may continue.
Thank you. Through you to administration. The landscaped area variance. Does the Sunrise Village Plaza in its entirety meet the minimum 20% landscaped area requirement?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm not aware if do you mean like the entire development from South Park Drive?
Yep.
Right, correct. I don't have those numbers in front of me. You know, the development review is specific to the subject site. We can point to things which are available close by. However, I would suggest that the review needs to be confined to the legal lot that is the subject site we're dealing with.
Okay, if I may continue. Okay, so the minimum required landscaped area is varied from 20% of the site area to 16.32%. That's a deviation of 18.4%. When the site is already that small, an 18.4% deviation is significant. Moreover, the landscaped area is located predominantly on the north and west side of the proposed development, with no apparent easy direct access for residents to get to it. The plans show no benches and/or tables in the landscaped area where the residents can sit and relax. The plans show only 2 benches provided on the south side of the building, neither of which are located on grass or shaded by any trees. The rest of the Sunrise Village Plaza constitutes an asphalt parking lot and commercial buildings. What is the purpose of requiring a minimum 20% landscaped area? Is it just to provide some green space, or is it to provide, in this case, a natural area where the residents can escape to for some peace and respite?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Weingarten. So I'll try to unpack that a little bit. I'll start with the latter of your statements. Why do we have requirements for landscaping? Several reasons. I think primarily just as a human being, you can recognize the green space is pleasing and calming, and so it's good for humans as they enjoy new uses and developments. Beyond the aesthetic element, I think you mentioned amenity space and place to relax. Yes, that's another good reason for landscaping requirements. There's also the element of drainage, and having excessive amounts of hardscape does create some taxing results on the infrastructure. So there's a wide range of reasons why we place landscape requirements in the land use bylaw. With respect to the subject site and how they have laid it out. Your previous questions and statements were with respect to the parking variances, right, and reducing the amount of parking. So really this was an act of going back and forth through different iterations of design to try to get a balanced approach between, you know, how much parking facility we would be providing, how much landscaping, and there's pros and cons to adding some and reducing others, right? So we're looking for a balanced approach is one thing that I would say. The elements that were added strategically with intents to limit some of the safety and limit some of the safety concerns and provide good pedestrian flow and access from the building to the different commercial uses on site. So when you look at the landscaping plan, it provides a bit of a buffer, a raised curbing and walkway area that acts as kind of an entry feature to the site and kind of intuitively lets you know that you're changing from a more commercial area to perhaps something that's a little bit different. You know, another thing to think about too is that as far as amenity space, there are significant amenity areas within the building. And the kind of programming that they're looking for at this site is probably predominantly senior citizens that will have some assistances on site. So those internal amenities were also valued and considered when approving the variance to the landscaping. Another thing that I would note is that the developer plans to enhance our municipal infrastructure and include a pedestrian walkway along the north edge of the Safeway, which would connect to South Park Drive, which would be a dedicated shared use path. So that's another thing that would be at the developer's expense that they're trying to do to, you know, to increase that livability, walkability, all those things that we're considering when we are looking at landscaping. So the sum of those parts, I think, is how we arrived at the variance that they proposed.
Thank you.
So we'll
Thank you.
we do have another question over here, so I'm going to give an opportunity for another board member, and then we can come back to you once we've had that. So Ms. Padry, please go ahead.
Thank you. Through the chair, I just want to get absolute clarification on the total number of stalls that are proposed to be within the parkade, including the amount that you're asking for through the variance. So I understand from the previous conversation that there's some counting of the surface parking as part of the variance, but how many stalls are anticipated to be dedicated to the residents of this building in the underground parkade?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Ms. Badri. So I would say that you probably have actually two questions there. You're asking how many spaces are dedicated to the operation or to the residents, and how many spaces are providing the underground parkade. Those may not be the same number. I would suggest that 100% of the parkade is obviously devoted to the resident. There may also be additional spaces on the surface that are devoted. That's not a requirement of the land use bylaw, and so it hasn't been, you know, enforced through a condition. But I think through just the intent to provide something that's competitive and a good product in the market, that's likely something they will do. The applicant may actually be here as well, may have a representative, so that might be a good question for them on their intents of parking and assignment. And I can provide you the number of parkade stalls if you would like that number specifically
Yes,
as well.
that's the number I would like, yes.
So while that answer's being looked up, I did have a question along the same lines. Obviously, this building contains different, you know, so there's a commercial aspect and there's a residential aspect. Can you confirm as well as the number of stalls that are required based on the residential occupancy, and then the additional number of stalls that are required on the commercial occupancy?
Sure. So through you, Mr. Chair, maybe I'll just answer that one right now while I have it in front of me. So for the residential, there are 25 one-bedroom units, which requires a 1-to-1 parking ratio, so 25 spaces. There are 64 units which are either 2 bedrooms or greater, which requires a 1 to 1.5 ratio. So that brings us to 96 units. So total residential, 25, the sum of 25 plus 96. And then additionally, 9 visitor spaces on top of that. And then the commercial parking requirement is based on the gross floor area, The gross floor area of the building is 1,172 meters squared. And so that's done at a ratio of 1 per 50 meters squared. So you divide by 50 meters squared, bringing you to 24 commercial spaces required. Total sum required, 154. And just bear with me while I look at the parkade. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Ms. Badri. It would appear to me, just doing a quick review, that it's 45 stalls underground.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Ms. Badger, were there any additions to your question?
Not at this time. Thank you.
Do you have anything additional at this time? Nope. Mr. Rollins? Yep, please go ahead.
Through the chair, on page 23 of the agenda package, there is a map of what the main floor would look like. And you had mentioned that a commercial space on the main floor is a requirement of this zoning or this type of development. And I see some resident uses on the main floor, and I'm wondering first if the sort of blank space on the other side is what is allotted to commercial use. And then if we know if it's, like if there's a certain number of commercial spaces that will be in there, or if it's open to like somebody could use the whole thing as one. I think that's the end of my question.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Ms. Johnson. So the land use bylaw wouldn't restrict them to, say, chunking up the commercial area for different commercial businesses. We would just be concerned that, yes, it is commercial on the ground floor in principle. To your point, that is kind of a mixed ground floor plan with some amenity spaces for the residents. Yes, absolutely. Some of that space is for the residents, devoted to the residents, and will be separate from the commercial uses. The intent of the regulation to ensure ground floor commercial is that you, in a sense, as a pedestrian, are experiencing the same kind of atmosphere, the same walkability and experience of a commercial area, just with residential above. And so that is achieved. They're meeting the intent of the regulation, although some of that space is shared for the residents. And then again, a lot of, I guess, balancing, right, to provide that amenity for residents. we're working with the applicant on a more complex mixed-use application. So we're really concerned with whether or not they're meeting the intent of the regulations. And as long as they're doing that, we can be flexible with the land use bylaw applications sometimes.
Did you have a follow-up on that? Any other questions from you at this time? Okay. Mr. Weingarten.
Chair, through you to administration. The underground stormwater reservoir, where is that located?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Weingarten. So it is located beneath the surface parking. And I would caution that while those are important considerations when reviewing a development, they are not the subject of this appeal.
Thank you.
Further questions?
Yes, please.
Yep, let's go ahead.
Utilities conflicts. You say that the subject property is a service lot in the South Business Park. Are there overhead and or shallow utilities located on the property?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Weingarten. Again, yes, there may be some utilities located on the property, not the subject of land use development approval. We do put notes within the permits to ensure that they're not conflicting with any of those such things. And maybe I'll even just take a step back and talk about the development process here, if I could. I'd like to explain the development permit as the what and the if. So we're deciding if it can happen, what can happen, right? Following that is the how. That's the approval of the engineering drawings, the civil package, building permits, which are not really subject to this process. We're talking about the what and the how, and those detailed designs come later, although they are often considerations up at the front to determine feasibility.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That's all for you, Chair? Excellent, thank you. Any other questions of the Development Authority? Mr. Mons, please go ahead.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Just could you expand a little bit more on the height variance required? What the issues there?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Mons, I believe. Sure, yes. The height permitted, or the permitted height of the C2 is 20 meters, which is, a height allotment where you would typically see 5 to 6 stories. So they, again, when we talk about intent of the regulation, they're meeting the intent of the height regulation. The variance represents about 8% deviation, which would be considered minor. Any impacts of a 20-meter building would be virtually identical to the impact of a 21-meter building. So it was determined to be reasonable to provide that allotment for variance in height.
Any follow-up on that, Mr. Mons? No. Additional questions? Any other members have any questions for the Development Authority? So seeing none, I do have a few myself. So to the Development Authority, obviously we know as lots are developed, as subdivision plans are approved, zoning oftentimes can change. There is a process to that does have to occur. I'm just wondering, do you have any history on this specific lot as to when this parcel was subdivided out, how long it has had the current zoning on it, when changes to any of that zoning occurred, and what those changes were?
To you, Mr. Chair, I don't have that complete history of the subdivision of that area for you. What would be readily available, though, is the time of approval of the area structure plan, which is usually indicative of when that area was becoming developed and when those original land use considerations were starting to happen. So I can provide that if you just bear with me.
Mm-hmm. Just for clarity purposes, this would be the South Business Park area structure plan then we would be looking at?
To you, Mr. Chair, yes, that's correct. I believe actually the most recent version of the plan was approved in just 2022. However, there was obviously lots of development there prior to that time. So, you know, if you would like a complete history, we can provide that. I would need a short recess perhaps, though, to prepare something comprehensive for you.
Thank you. I think that would be beneficial to what we're looking at. And I'm not sure if we necessarily would need a recess. Would you be able to do that while the appellant was presenting there? Would you be able to acquire that information, or would you need a recess in order to make sure you're paying attention to anything that would need to be answered there?
To you, Mr. Chair, I'll do my best. I think that's probably enough time. Try to multitask. Can I just get a clarification on exactly what the request would be?
So the request would be, and again, just for context for those that don't have the document in front of them, the area structure plan for the South Business Park area extends from Veterans Boulevard all the way to Golf Course Road, and then from Highway 16A all the way to the CN rail line. So it is a rather large area. We're focusing down on a very specific area, which is the one commercial mixed use lot. So what I would be looking for is any history on this specific commercial mixed use lot. In particular, how long this particular lot has been zoned at the current zoning, in which would have allowed a development similar to this, but without the variances required.
I'll do my best to find that history for you.
Thank you. And I do have a couple of other questions. So you did speak a little bit in regards to the infrastructure, and you did mention that, you know, the infrastructure was a consideration in the development process. Now, so again, just for clarity purposes, existing infrastructure or new services are all a part of that process, and as a part of that process, there are checks and balances to ensure that all infrastructure that either exists or will be required is identified to meet the appropriate capacities for the size of the development that is being completed. So whether it's storm management, sewer, water, power, gas, etc., as a part of the process, those checks and balances are done to make sure that either existing infrastructure or new infrastructure will meet the needs and the capacity required by the development.
Sure. To you, Mr. Chair. So yes, like I mentioned before, typically those considerations do come after the development permit. What we at the town usually require is at a minimum conceptual information about their servicing to determine feasibility and if the development is realistic. In this case, we went a little bit above and beyond from a civil perspective because we had some concerns about drainage on site, especially considering the proximity to Highway 16A. So usually what would take place is that the development permit is issued based on conceptual servicing information, and a condition of the development permit is that a complete civil set of engineered drawings are accepted by our engineering department. So that is still a condition of the development permit. However, preemptively, even before the development permit was issued, we had a complete civil set submitted and accepted by our engineering department.
And was that solely on the stormwater then?
Civil in its entirety. Every consideration, lock grading, sanitary, stormwater, comprehensive.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I appreciate that answer. So I just want to then confirm with you the variances. So from the current zoning, so the current zoning under C2, the variances that are being requested. So we have the change of the 90-degree compact car parking space varied from 2.5 meters to, and 2.5 by 4.9 meters to 2.5 by 4.79 meters for a reduction of 0.11 meters. Is that correct?
That is correct.
For the total amount of required parking, and this one did have a little bit of a conflict in another spot, so I do want to just confirm this one. On page 11 of our package, it is showing a total provided of 136, but then on page 10 it is showing a provided of 129. Can you confirm which of those numbers is the correct number for the variance?
To you, Mr. Chair, the correct number for the variance is 129. I believe that that calculation was part of a documented technical review which came at a previous iteration of the site plan. Apologies for not noting that in the package, but the correct provided parking is 129 as stated in the development permit.
Excellent. And so that variance, that is from 154 as currently required under the development in the C2 zoning. And so that would be a variance of 25 stalls. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Awesome. So again, the maximum building height allowable under the current C2 zoning being 20 meters, we were being requested a variance to 21.63 meters. So the variance being considered this evening then is the 1.63 meters of additional height.
That's correct.
And then in regards to the setback, the minimum west side lot line setback varied from 4 meters as required under the C2 zoning to 3.81 meters for a change of 0.19 meters to the west side lot line setback. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then finally, the minimum required landscape area is varied from 20% of the site area to 16.32%, or a reduction of 3.68%.
Correct.
Excellent, thank you very much. There are no other variances that are required to be approved by the SDAB at this time in order for this development application to move forward?
That's correct.
And there are no other items then that would be appealable?
The decision of the board could technically be appealed if there was an error in jurisdiction or law, but with respect to this permit and the merits, no.
Excellent, thank you. So again, just for clarity, other than the items that have been noted, the 5 variances that have been noted, there are no other items at this point in time that do not meet the C2 zoning, therefore would not be appealable.
Correct.
Excellent, thank you very much. Does anybody else have any other questions for the Development Authority before we move on? Excellent. Seeing none, thank you very much, and we will come back to you after we go through the appellant presentations and questions. We'll see if there's an answer to my previous question at that point in time. At this point in time, I would like to call the appellant up to proceed with their presentation, please.
To the chair and the SDAB members, board.
Yep. Thank you.
Sorry, through the chair, the appellant would be the individuals that
Yes.
submitted the appeal? Okay.
Yeah, sorry, you're the applicant. So we're looking for the appellant, so the person that submitted the appeal.
Yeah, that would be Ken Arnold.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So again, if I can just have you make sure you lean right in and speak directly into that microphone. And if I can have you start by signing in and announcing your name to the board so we know how to address you.
Yes, my name is Ken Arnold, and I am representing Sunrise Village, which is adjacent to the proposed development just to the west.
Excellent. Thank you. Please proceed with your presentation.
I have, along with other members of the condo association, have object to the and oppose this development. Not in the sense that we are opposed to housing or senior housing even, because we are all seniors ourselves. But we find this development is going to be impact our village, and thus we are opposed. Would you like me to read this over again? We have issued it and put it in on the Tuesday before, and it's on, and should have been handed to all of you.
So just have you clarify with the SCB clerk, that is in our package? Excellent. Yep, so we have received that, and we
You
would
have
have reviewed
received
that
that, yes?
document. Yep.
Okay. I will not take the time then to go over it again and read it. Are there any questions, or should I just go through our reasons for opposition?
Yeah, you can certainly go through. Just so that all members are on the same page, can you advise which page of the package that letter is located on?
Through the chair, it's page 66.
It's page 66. Thank you very much. There we are. Excellent. Excellent. So we do have it here in front of us. So if you wanted to go through it in summarization and give it some context if you'd like, definitely.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Our primary concern with the development is the absence of any documentation which shows how the stormwater runoff from Sunrise Village will be handled. The stormwater, which naturally flows north, exits our property both to the west and to the east. We were told that during the construction of the Sunrise Village in the 1980s, that the town constructed a berm along the north side of the property that diverted runoff to the adjacent properties. On the west side of the utility right-of-way, a culvert was installed by the town under the berm, which allows the water to flow northward to the ditch next to Highway 16A. As the developer owned the property that Sunrise Village stands on, plus the land adjacent to the east, Sunrise Village Plaza, the town approved a plan to allow the runoff to exit our property to the east into the low area, i.e. Lot B, which then flowed into the same ditch along Highway 16A. All of this stormwater then flowed to the east along 16A. The proposed development will result in a blockage of this water flow, as the west wall of the building will be about 10 feet from our property line. We insist that a stormwater drainage plan and a solution to the stormwater running to the east be provided for both the construction phase and when the building is completed and operational. Now, I read under the proposed, I noticed that the city signed off on the proposed development handling of the groundwater problem. But this must have been similar to our construction back in the late 1980s, where the city signed off on allowing us to have our stormwater exit onto the adjacent property, which at that time was a slough. Second, several residences in Sunrise Village are adjacent to the west side of the proposed development. Our buildings are typical single-story duplexes with overhangs and peaked roofs. Given that the prevailing winds in our area are from the northwest, we are concerned about the possible effect of wind shearing and a wind tunnel impacting the roofing material on these dwellings. Anytime a 6-story building is constructed within a few meters of a lower building, the wind force is multiplied, with the potential of severely damaging the roofing material. Since our village is a condominium development, the additional expense of having to replace roofing as a result of wind shearing or wind tunneling will have an adverse financial effect on all of our residents. An additional concern is with the sewer line, which exits our property to the east near the Bank of Nova Scotia drive-through. We believe this line runs under the current shopping center parking lot. We have not been able to obtain any drawings of this line from the planning department or Public Works, nor has this line been addressed in any plans that were available to us. Our main concerns are Has the existence of this line been included in the plans as it would run directly under the proposed development? Has the size of the line been reviewed to ensure that it has the capacity to handle the sewage from an additional 100-plus residents? In the spring of '21, we had sewer backup on 4 residents that are on our northernmost side of our property. We had the town came in and started trying to find out why the backup was occurring. This was during COVID in February, and a lot of the restaurants had closed down, and at about 6 o'clock we noticed this, and the truck came trying to find where the plug was. Finally, at about 2 o'clock in the morning, they discovered the plug was north of Safeway and to the west of the Safeway gas bar. There was a grease blockage there. Once the plug was cleared, then our 4 units that were having the sewer backup resumed a regular flow. So this is what led us to the conclusion that our sewer must eventually head over towards the adjacent property. We feel that if the capacity of the line is exceeded, then the sewage would back up again into the basement of our residence. We are also concerned about the planned building of the proposed development on land which in the past was a slough. Up until 2 years ago, there was standing water continually on that land until late August. The last 2 years, it's been more of a drought, and usually the water will dissipate on that land from the surface sometime in June. The soil under the development, we expect, is similar to that of which is under Sunrise Village. We are concerned with the impact of having a 6-story complex whose weight would be multiple times that of our units, what that would have on our homes. The impact of this much weight would cause soil mitigation, which would result in basement failures in our buildings. We would like to ask if the geotechnical aspects and implications on the adjacent properties within Sunrise Village has been provided for during the construction and the planning in the long term. As the proposed development's plan is for a 6-story building, our owners who are directly west of this development will have significant decrease in quality of life. Most of the units on the north half of Sunrise Village were designed to face away from our street, our oval street. Thus, the patio doors, dining, living, and master bedroom windows will be all facing the proposed building at a minimum distance of only 11.8 meters. The proximity of the patio decks will be 7.8 meters from this huge building. To put this in context, think of your personal dwelling and the impact that a 6-story structure that is only 12 meters from your home would have on your mental well-being. If this development proceeds in its present form, our residents will suffer significant loss of morning sunlight, resulting in the higher heating costs, and more importantly, loss in quality of life due to the shadow effect. We may even have to change the name of our village from Sunrise Village to just Village. A building which is more in line with a commercial development with a height like Safeway building would certainly lessen this impact. Our last concern is with the additional traffic flow that will exit on 37th Street onto 44th Avenue. Both sides of 37th Street will be affected, not only us who have to turn, who come in from the north, but also residents across the street. Our residents already experience significant delays in trying to exit this roadway onto 44th Avenue. We were told that a traffic study was done for the plaza, but has a traffic study for 37th Street been performed, which can be used to predict what the impact will be when a further 100-plus residents and associated service personnel could potentially use this exit. Presently, during busy times, a left turn onto 44th Avenue requires a lot of patience, and we've seen several close accidents on that. There's no room for a light because there's a light just right down, and there's two lights within a proximity of about a street. As you can tell, we have considerable concerns about the approval of this development. While we understand that the development of this lot will probably eventually take place, we oppose the size of the development, as the lot has been classified for commercial development, not a 6-story residential property. Our concerns about water flow and the sewer line must be addressed, as it could severely impact the financial operation of Sunrise Village. The sheer size of the building, the impact on our residents from loss of sunlight, the impact of wind shear and wind tunneling will severely impact our seniors' residents' quality and emotional of life and emotional well-being. Thank you for allowing me to express our concerns. Do we have any questions?
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mr. Arnold. Appreciate your presentation. I'll just flip back here. Perfect. So, at this time, I will ask if the board has any questions for Mr. Arnold. Yep, Ms. Johnson, please go ahead.
Through the chair to the appellant. You mentioned anytime a 6-story building is constructed within a few meters of a lower building, the wind force is multiplied with the potential of severely damaging the roofing material. This sounds like a statement of fact, and so I was wondering if you had any references to evidence this.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the last
Sure.
a statement of what?
It sounds like a statement of fact, so I was wondering if there is any references for the evidence of this.
Any statement of evidence? I have brought with me the vice president and also the treasurer of the association. I might refer to, can I refer to one of them right now?
So believe they will be additional registered speakers, is that correct?
I registered them when I came in. One was Bob Ross and the other is Ken Borsch.
Yeah, so we will hear from them. So if there was something that you feel to be a more appropriate question for them, you can definitely advise which one you think that we would ask that of, and then that question can be asked at that
Okay,
time.
and I will, okay, could you direct this question to Bob Ross, please?
I do have more.
Yep. Nope. So we'll wait until, Mr. Ross, we'll wait until your presentation. Yeah, we'll wait until your presentation.
These are my
So we'll-
co-presenters.
Through the chair. So Mr. Arnold registered 3 speakers as part of this initial presentation.
Okay.
So if you would like to hear him at this point, or he could maybe come up right after this gentleman, it's your...
Sure. Actually, if you would like to join Mr. Arnold then, if you're able to answer the technical questions, I would invite you to do so now, and then that way you can share the mic back and forth.
I did hear the question, I believe, correctly, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, so we'll just have the question repeated.
Okay, so and this is actually a 2-part question, and I've only stated the first part. It says, anytime a 6-story building is constructed within a few meters of a lower building, the wind force is multiplied with the potential of severely damaging the roofing material. And and I said that this sounds like a statement of fact, and was wondering if there's any references for scientific or other kind of evidence to support this statement. There is one more statement as well. In number 4, it says the impact of that much weight could cause soil mitigation, which could result in basement failures in our buildings. So I was just wondering the same question for that statement.
Okay, in relation to the wind tunneling and wind shear, I don't have the material with me to provide the particular backup, but to give you a point of reference, when you have wind shear occurring off a 6-story building, you can end up with a 25 to 30% increase in the velocity of that wind, and I will provide that documentation to whoever would like me to give it to you when I...
So are you able to provide that document within the time frame of this hearing this evening?
I will not be able to.
So that would not be something then that we would be able to consider. As we can only consider evidence that is presented in the hearing, so we would need something fact-based within the time frame of the hearing this evening.
Okay. And then the soil mitigation, there again, I don't have the material with me, but you know, you're looking at a building that weighs approximately 800 pounds per square foot, sitting beside a building that weighs 200 pounds per square foot. I'm very concerned about the geotechnical aspects of that based on the soil around that area. It's moving constantly. Is that?
Am I allowed to direct questions to the Development Authority concerning their presentation?
I believe a question of clarity, yes.
That's what it is.
Would that be correct?
Through the chair, yes.
Yep.
Okay. Through the chair to the Development Authority, the appellant mentioned, I have two things. So the first one is in 3B of their presentation. It says, has the size of the line been reviewed to ensure that it has the capacity to handle the sewage from an additional 100+ residents? So just wondering the answer to that question. And then if it has been reviewed, is there a plan for the increased capacity or any improvements being made because of the increased capacity?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So as I previously stated, the civil engineering aspect of the proposed development is not typically reviewed during the development review process. In this case, as an exception, we intended to be extremely diligent, and in this case, an entire civil set of drawings have been reviewed and approved by the town's engineering department. So yes, all the lines have been reviewed. The proposed build has been reviewed by civil engineers and approved.
And through the chair to the Development Authority, if something happened, like the backup that was mentioned, who is responsible for any issues that happen?
Through you, Mr. Chair, very difficult to determine who may be responsible for a clog in a sewer system. I don't know that we would attribute blame, or I believe that the town would just respond, perform inspections, and look to rectify whatever the situation was. It's our infrastructure, so, I mean, at the time of construction, it's often a private developer who will build the infrastructure. It goes through certification processes through our engineering department, and we eventually take on that infrastructure and maintain it. So I would say any clogs are the town's responsibility to fix.
Any further questions?
No, that's it.
Thank you. So any other questions of the appellant? Please go ahead.
To Mr. Arnold, as the president of the Sunrise Condo Association, I appreciate that Mr. Young has mentioned that the engineers have done extensive reviews, et cetera, but in your time as president or as a resident there, have you known of any issues with foundations of any residents or lot settling that might be attributed to the concerns around the site being a former slough?
Yes, we have several, not several, but we've had foundation problems. The viscosity of the soil because of the water and the slough, and that area, whole area, from what I am told from long-term, I've only been in the development for 4 years, but from what I've heard from long-time residents, we were built upon basically a very wet lowland area. And high water table has resulted. So there have been some foundation break, some settling in the area. We are continually maintaining our buildings, our dwellings in the summer, and have done a lot of parging, a lot of stuccoing, basically every summer that I've been there, and I'm sure for a long term, because of cracks developing. And but I'll give you once again to Bob, because he's been there much longer than I was, and he was the ex-president before I took over. So I will let him address it too. Maybe he has more specifics.
It's all good.
Mr. Chair, just to kind of back that up, some of our basement floors over the years have had some heaving in them where we've had to go in and do some stuff. We've had to install sump pumps to relieve water pressure in a number of the units.
Okay. I think so. I think if I ask through the chair a follow-up question, do you notice that any of the units that are closer to the proposed development are having more issues, or is it just sort of spread across?
It's kind of general across the
Okay.
whole development.
Okay.
The ones out in the northeast corner probably have a little more issues with the water table because we've got some pumps in that area.
Thank you. Appreciate it. That's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And actually, I'd just like to follow up on that one. Again, considering the zoning and the applicable use, again, of the C2 General Commercial District as it's listed, the C2 General Commercial use does have that building height of 20 meters. The lot coverage is 60%. Of the issues that you're mentioning, as we're looking at what we're looking at here today in regards to the variances, which issues would you specify would be directly related to the variances versus which issues do you believe would apply to the C2 districting in general?
That's a good question. From a personal point of view, if you took their drawing and give it a 180-degree turn and pushed it over towards Safeway, would be a lot better day for the people of Sunrise Village if you were to proceed with that development.
So a question then that I have, so when you're speaking about, in the letter, you talk about so the wind shearing, which I would understand, moving the building to the other side of the property, that would increase the distance from the property line. In regards, though, to the settling that you mentioned, the soil mitigation, with a 20-meter building covering 60% of that lot, would that change based on the variance of, say, going to a 21.63 meter building?
I don't believe it would. That's very, very close for residential.
So I'm just making sure here that I've got all mine.
If I can expand on that a little bit more, Mr. Chairman, about flipping at 180. The significance of that is it's moving that building away from that west fence, like from our property line, and moving it over towards the east. I realize it would cause a little bit more traffic, but most of that traffic is local traffic that goes around into their parkade. And the surface area that the complex would be exposed to would be significantly less than what is being currently proposed.
Right, and thank you, and I appreciate the context of the comment there, and that's, I think this is, where, as the SDAB, we have to take into consideration the variances that have been provided and what to be considered versus the zoning, that was a completely different process at a different time, which is the question that I asked of the planning. So at this time, I'm just going to look to the planning authority and see, do we have any of the answers on the history of the zoning at this time?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Excellent. Are you able to provide those?
Yes, so an area structure plan was approved for the area in 1982. I don't have the concept plan available from 1982. However, there was an amendment to the plan in 1994, which shows that the area was designated for commercial development, a corresponding land use map. So you can be sure that there was consistent land use patterns, proposals for the area at a minimum for 30 years, which proposed commercial development.
So thank you. And then Mr. Arnold or Mr. Ross, would you be able to provide an approximate year that Sunrise Village was constructed? I think I heard 86 from the...
Probably started in 86, completed in the early 90s.
Approximately 1986, 1990. Excellent, thank you. Any other questions for the appellant? Looking to the board. Mr. Weingarten, any other questions to the appellant? No? Anything else that you'd like to add before we move on?
No, but thank you very much for allowing us to express our concerns. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So at this time, we will hear from all who wish to speak this evening. And I'm just asked again, as we spoke earlier in the meeting, to please come forward with any additional or new information that has not already been presented to the panel. So at this time, I'd like to call to those in favor of the appeal to come up to speak. And do we have anybody registered, or is it strictly from the gallery then?
Through the chair, yes. So our next registered speakers in favor of the appeal is Gordon and Patricia Borley.
Are they present? Yeah, you may come forward to speak.
All of our concerns have been spoken.
Have been spoken to? Excellent, thank you. Next registered speaker?
Through the chair, the next registered speaker is Mike Batty.
Mr. Batty? Yeah, please come forward.
All our concerns have been covered.
All yours have been spoken to? Excellent, thank you.
The next registered speaker is Florence Borch.
My concerns have been covered.
Your concerns have been spoken to? Okay.
And that's all the registered speakers.
So then at this time, I will call for any other speakers who wish to speak in favor of the appeal. One more time, any other speakers in favor of the appeal? Awesome, thank you. At this time, I'd like to call on the applicant to please come forward and proceed with their presentation.
Chair and SDB members. My name is Terry Collier with EFG Architects. My primary role today is to clearly explain the use of the building and the design with reference to this project. There's a significant shortage of senior supportive housing in your community. And what that means is supportive living is those individuals typically, it's not age related, but they're typically over 80 that need an environment that's rich in amenities and services with architectural design such as 6-foot wide hallways, wider doorways, walk-in showers with removable shower heads for home care, zero transition flooring, bedroom ceilings reinforced for bariatric ceiling lifts, and emergency call system. It's very important that the members and the chair recognize that the group that we're talking about is at the latter stages of their life without a significant medical determinant. So basically what you're looking at is not this group that's here, it could be that group, but primarily folks that that want to be in a more secure environment that is monitored. The reason why I brought this slide to everyone's attention, if you notice there's a home care office, and more up to the board member that talked about the extra commercial space. Right now there's a one tenant use for the commercial space, but there's a second commercial space, and we've held that back, hoping that we will win a cluster care contract. We can't put that on the drawings because that would be premature. But this building will be applying for supportive services through Alberta Health, and that's why we have that commercial portion that's separated between the two. And that's because, once again, we have a home care office because our people will be receiving home care. And if the members would like to understand the concept of cluster care, it's very simple. You congregate people that need home care so it's more efficient, so home care is not driving from home to home. The second issue with cluster care is that most people that receive home care in their home are exposed 18 to 20 hours a day minimum. And when you're in our building, what that allows you to do is to press a button and to receive support. So even though you're receiving the same home care, the context is differently. And then lastly, if we are successful with the RFP, it'll allow us to hire our own staffing, which eliminates having 6 or 8 different people attending one person. So through traditional home care, they don't always send the same personnel, and with this cluster care contract. Why this becomes important for us to understand is then why do we want a 6-story building? And it's not just the density. The issue really boils down to our software for fall detection. The primary reason why people move into our buildings for supportive living typically is that they're starting to fall. That software does not work off the grounds, it only works in the building. And I don't know if we have a slide here, but to go back to your landscape issue, we have on the 6th floor a large landscape area, but it's controlled. And what that means is it's not impacted by the greater community. So we will have more than the 16 or 18% landscaping. It's just not on the outer grounds. It's up on the building on our rooftop patio. Beyond that, as you notice, it has an office. We have 24-hour staffing, etc., and emergency call. Mixed use is the future. So when I started in 1986 in San Diego in this industry, I'm a gerontologist, we used to look for beautiful places with rippling creeks and beautiful pastures. Those days are over. What we're looking now for is a site that has the maximum amount of services that a senior would want daily. And so we literally, I was part of the 3 Robins group that built the library. We were looking for a second project. We specifically went after this property. And the specifics are everything a senior needs, they could walk to. So just to tell you the future, Seattle Housing SHAG is going to mixed use. Almost every developer in senior supportive living is going to a mixed use property. The other thing you have to understand is we fight isolation. And by having the property where people are coming to get their groceries, family, friends, etc., we get a higher propensity for people to come visit. So for example, in Grand Prairie, we built next to a shopping center that had a movie theater. And we could see many of our residents having their daughters and sons having their kids go to the matinee movie while they come visit their parent. So it's really important that there's an integration of commercial. What makes this really unique, so of course we've had a traffic study, and to give you context, we have it's about 1-to-1 over at 3 Robins. And it's tight, but it works. because the library, etc. Here we have much more parking that's available. But I want to explain to you how we can manage this parking. So when you become a resident and you're not in the underground parkade, which is exclusive for residents, you will be given a hanger that hangs off your mirror, and it'll say resident of the property. So then when we take the parking lot and we have designated parking, it's very easy for our staff to go through and verify who's in the parking spots. So we are very concerned about parking, because parking is not as important to our residents, but having available parking for guests and visitors is really, really important. Once again, we're not in the care business, we're in the loneliness business. Any way you can get more people to visit, it's healthier. So we do want to bring a couple unique features. We will be applying for a neighborhood electric vehicle. They've been certified in British Columbia, throughout Canada. They're vehicles that go 40 kilometers an hour. They're street legal, they're insured, but what it does is it allows our seniors to continue driving and shopping on roads that are 40 kilometers an hour. And so what we're looking for is a progression. Instead of removing someone's license, which is really, really negative, we have a progressive system. So what you'll see is we do have an electric car for folks to, at 45 cents a kilometer, they can drive wherever they choose, and then we'll have these neighborhood electric vehicles. And then more importantly, what you're going to see is some of our residents using the trikes. And the trike is really great because it allows people to keep their parcels, their bags, etc., but it gets them out and it's electric to support them. Just like we're very pro-walkers, and this is a great walkable community for us, because if we can get people to go outside more, it enhances their health. There's going to be a very robust volunteer program at 3 Robinson Stony Plain. It exceeds over 1,000 hours a month. And the logic behind that is, regardless of your condition, you can still contribute. And we work with our residents so they all participate. You'll have people in a wheelchair that are basically looking after the potatoes, peeling potatoes. Everyone can have a job. We find people jobs. And the logic behind that is that we can't afford to be the Chartwells or the Riveras, where a one-bedroom's $3,500 a month. The way we get those supportive services is that we all chip in and do the work. This is not pie in the sky. We have multiple buildings under this format, and it works. Some of the services we'll offer, it'll be 24-hour emergency call, general manager, rec, maintenance, housekeeping, laundry, and available food services. Once again, we love this location because of all the available eating venues. One thing that you can all understand is if you move into a building where it has prescribed meals, where every meal is in the same building, it doesn't take long for all the food to start to taste the same. So having a mixture of multiple food venues is great. I'd also like to bring to your attention that we'll have remote patient monitoring. So this is a new technology that's changing our industry. It not only tracks where people are in the building if they want it to be tracked. So for example, if you went to visit your mother, you'd come to the front desk and say, "Where's Shirley?" And we could press a button and we'd know if she's visiting Mrs. Johnson or Mrs. Smith, or what room she's in terms of amenities. But more importantly, this does our fall detection. The primary support that we give people is they can wear a wristwatch, and if they do fall, we know immediately they fall, where they fell, the time they fell, and then we have cameras that can verify what created the fall. Was it a health issue? Was it an environmental issue, etc.? So why is this important to your community? Well, one reason, it's going to include 89 more supportive units. So one of the things that didn't get brought up today is people say, why are the suites so large? I'm going to give you a hint. The traditionalists born from 1920 to 1940 are not today's baby boomers. We have ladies at 80 plus now that are baby boomers. The first baby boomer, of course, is in 2025, will turn 80. And they have enough clothes that would fill a small studio. The world is changing. They want larger suites. And the other provision you need to be aware of is the cost of home care is getting very expensive. We expect granny nannies to be ushered in with the new Canadian immigration policy. What that allows is that you have to have a secure bedroom for the nanny to live in the seniors unit. So that people say, why do you have 2 bedrooms? Well, we have 2 bedrooms, one for granny nannies, and second is the fantasy bedroom. And what I mean by that is the fantasy the kids are going to come visit. And they don't. They stay at a hotel. But mom wants a 2-bedroom because of that. What's very unique about this project is we're going to drive the services to the suite, opposed to moving seniors into institutional care. It is a middle-income product, so the rents will start from $1,300 to $2,700. So the property has offices to support AHS. We're hoping for a cluster care contract. That's why we have part of the commercial space empty. We're going to allow seniors who do not drive to be able to walk to all their shopping, including medical office. And our robust volunteer program will have a positive impact because our gardeners alone will maintain the surrounding areas. So it'll be quite beautiful. Gardening's a big pastime for our people. That is my presentation. Is there any questions? I addressed the parking issue. I've addressed the landscaping issue. In terms of the height, we could drop the building 2 feet. We're just trying to give more height in each suite, on each floor, but we could drop it down to 8 feet. A lot of these are 9 feet plus. Why? Because it makes the suite feel bigger, and that's what people enjoy. But if that was a problem for this board, it's not a problem for us to drop a foot or two. It just doesn't have any impact on the bigger picture. An extra meter, 3 feet after you're up 60 feet really doesn't have much impact. Is there any questions that I can answer? I'd look forward to that.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and I'll just look for questions.
I do have a question.
Yep, Ms. Badger, please go ahead.
Through the chair. I have previous experience with municipal affairs, specifically in seniors in housing, so I have a lot of appreciation for what you're saying in terms of why and how you're building the product that you are. I've been very frustrated in the past when I see buildings like this sort of stuck in the middle of a neighborhood with no clear access to amenities. So I think the concept of being really close to pharmacy, grocery, dental, optometry is fantastic, but to try and stay focused on the variances that are requested and the ability for to appeal those specific elements that you're asking for variances on. I'm gonna come back to the parking. And so when I look at, and I just kind of, I guess I want to check in and make sure I'm understanding the context of this right. So we have about 89 units in the building. 45 stalls approximately are going underground. I think I saw a stat on your slide deck that you're estimating 25% of your residents will not be driving.
When they enter the building.
When they enter the building. So that leaves us, even if it's 1 car per unit, at about 67 stalls that are needed. So if we only have 45 underground, that leaves us 22 for like that surface shared parking model that you were speaking of, plus volunteers, plus operational. And so I think for me, that's where the concern for the variance of going from 154 down to 129, I still would like to maybe get some clarity on just how you would see that sort of all balancing out and managing it without impacting exactly what you're trying to achieve of that quality of life for everybody in that community.
The property, because of its location, is going to attract people that have challenges driving. So let's start with who our population, seniors over 80, that typically that have had some form of health experience that they're worried that they're declining. Mm-hmm. Right now, if it was an ISL building, independent supportive living, housekeeping, laundry, food service, recreation, transportation, the parking requirement for that is 0.75. Mm-hmm. If we add on home care and we have a strategy for cluster care, the parking goes down to 0.25 to 0.5.
Got it.
So what I'd like to bring to your attention, when you walk into a building that has a home care office, mm-hmm. et cetera, we're expecting to have a day program for dementia, mm-hmm. it tends to lend to people that don't drive much.
Right.
Within 3 to 5 years, we will need probably 50% of the parking because people age in place. Mm-hmm. And then what we find when people come in to move into the property later, the ones come with a higher acuity of care because we've got a reputation for doing supportive services. So once again, this is not a lifestyle product, but we can use the anecdotal evidence from 3 Robins. Mm-hmm. 3 Robins doesn't have the home care, it isn't going for cluster care, doesn't have 24-hour monitoring. That property has 1-to-1 parking per
right.
suite. and it's been tight, but now it's starting to loosen up on the second and third year.
Yeah.
With our neighborhood electric vehicles, what you're going to find is a lot of people find it, are middle income, very expensive to have an automobile. Now with the mandatory licensing at 80, where you have to be checked by your physician and tested, it's very obvious that driving is going to become less and less of an issue. We have a joke that says when you're 81 years old and you buy a vehicle, you should take your grandson, because he's the one who's going to really be using it. You may get 2,000 or 3,000 kilometers before you relinquish your license. So I understand it's an issue, but I think with the way we monitor the hangers on the mirrors, recognizing, and the volunteers, remember, are not outside community members, it's internal volunteers. We don't see many people volunteer. They typically go to a higher acuity facility, like a hospital or a long-term care facility.
Gotcha.
So we won't really get any outside visitors. I will tell you the days that are significant: Mother's Day, Father's Day, Christmas Day, those are the days that we get multi-generational visiting, and it could have an impact. In terms of my residents, like I said, we've never brought such a robust electric neighborhood program with the electric bikes. We're moving away from that. In fact, we have a new property that we're not going to allow any gasoline vehicles. Once again, it's in British Columbia.
That's very helpful.
So I guess we have a parking study by Mark Huberman Transportation. It says that we have more than adequate parking. He's a professional that does parking analysis. That's part of your report.
Yep.
And even with that, we're increasing the acuity of care, we hope, in this property. Once again, I would be, if I had the RFP won and secured for cluster care, we wouldn't be having that conversation, because 50% plus would not be driving. Thank you.
That was very helpful, thank you. One follow-up,
Yes,
if I may.
go ahead.
And just through the
Absolutely.
chair, I noticed you had the drawings for the garbage truck detail and aerial fire truck. So sorry, I'm not sure if this is a question through to you or to the Development Authority for clarity, but have you also done something similar for like the Stony Plain bus or paratransit vehicles, like what that access would be?
So we did contact you're talking transportation, like traditional public transportation?
Basically the door-to-door paratransit.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we'll be supporting that. It's a fantastic location. It's easy egress in and out. We did talk about the bus and upgrading a bus environment that we could contribute with the local transportation. Instead of just having a bench that's exposed to the elements, we've talked about upgrading that. What's unique is we have a ride share program. Very few of our residents in our buildings use public transportation. Where it becomes really important is with staffing. Because the buildings that have care aides, HCAs and PCAs, typically they're economically disadvantaged, and a lot of them are new Canadians that use the transit. So transit will become more important if we increase the acuity of care in the building. Right now, I think you'll see the majority of our people doing ride share, and then we have, of course, transportation provided.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions of the applicant? Mr. Weingarten, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the applicant. Going back to your landscape area, I note you have some 20 elm trees being planted there. Have you considered at all putting some of those elm trees on the east side of the property to provide the Sunrise Village residents some privacy, some semblance of privacy, so that they don't have people looking into their living room windows and bedroom windows and what have you?
Yes, thank you. So we have a landscape architect, and what I'll be doing is going back to our landscape architect after having this group of people share their concerns, and we have no problem modifying that. Two things that we can do is, one is provide irrigation on the property, which most likely we will, and then that allows the trees to grow faster because we can monitor the water. And secondly, we can look at fast growth trees. The only issue we have to worry about is those roots going into their property and then impacting their municipal services. But we have no problem modifying our landscaping with your direction through the planning department. Once again, because of the size of the project, we have a landscape architect, and we'll be placing a bond to make sure that our plants make it through the course of the first year.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Mr. Moyer?
No, that's good, thank you.
Any other questions for the appellant? So seeing none, I do have just a couple of questions here. We did hear a question earlier, or a request earlier from the appellant in regards to the current location of the building and how it's situated on the lot. I'm just wondering if you can walk us through any considerations that were made for the placement of the building on the lot itself and why or why not it could not be placed in another configuration.
Thank you. The first issue is it has to stay on that lot because the owner of that property has that lot and they have that zoning. So we can't flip it to another location like where Safeways is. Beyond that, most of our, it's the setbacks that dictate the location, but most importantly, it's the egress for fire emergency services, et cetera, and access to our parkade. We went back and forth, I call it ping pong, but with the planning department, there was many revisions, primarily to make it more of a walkable community. And they did have concerns on the impact of the adjacent properties, and we did do that. We'd be happy to look at it, but if you look at where the building's placed, it's pretty strategic in terms of the municipal services, in terms of egress for fire trucks, et cetera, because they have to get around the entire building.
Yep. Excellent. Nope, thank you. I just wanted to give an opportunity for an answer to that question.
Thank you.
The next question that I have. Well, what you've presented is a fantastic concept. The reality is that at times things can change. So I need to ask the question, are you able to guarantee that this building will always be used for this use?
Thank you. I can't guarantee, but what I can tell you is we have 14,000 Albertans right now waiting for an assisted living bed. Most of us will see Jesus before we see an assisted living bed in Alberta. The last 3 years, the current government did not build a single long-term care bed or assisted living bed. So the reality is, this is all economics. And it's more profitable to run a cluster care supportive living apartment than a market apartment. In fact, if you look at the market apartment rental rates in your community, the project wouldn't be fundable. It would not be sustainable. When you look at 6,000 square foot of amenity space, et cetera, I do believe in the future that there will be a change in usage at about probably 2050, 2055. We're gonna see our baby boomers go through the cycle and we won't. I expect, and once again, I'm not a futurist, but I expect we will have different modes of transportation in terms of how we handle traditional transportation. So I cannot guarantee that. What I can tell you is the current developer is a very seasoned developer. They chose this location as a pilot project for this type of product. They weren't interested in market apartments. They were specifically, and that's why they hired our architectural firm. We specialize in supportive living apartments. So I would think for the next 30 years we're safe. After that, you're right, it's a demand-driven product. Life expectancy is about 80 years in this building. So we could have an issue 30 to 40 years from now, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. And just before we move on, any other questions of the applicant? Seeing none, thank you very much for your presentation. So I will now call for any of those in favor of the applicant. Do we have any registered?
Through the chair, there are no registered.
Okay. So is there anyone present in the gallery then that would like to speak in favor of the applicant? Okay. Please come forward. And if you can introduce yourself to the gallery, please.
I'll introduce myself quickly to the board and to the gallery. My name is Tom Gold, and I am the Chief Administrative Officer for the town of Stony Plain. Good evening, members of the board. As noted, I'm the CAO here in Stony Plain. I've held this role since 2010.
So if we can just have you try and speak up a little bit more. There's some obvious hard hearing behind.
All right, I'll try to get right into
There,
my...
that is much better, thank you.
My duties include overseeing the operations of the town, acting as chief policy advisor to council, and leading an organization of over 150 full-time equivalent positions. Throughout my career, I've been invited to provide advice on different provincial and federal government policy development initiatives, including housing policy and development-related regulations. My insight has been focused on the intersection of broader policy and local implementation. And Mr. Chair, I live and work here in the town of Stony Plain. I'm here to speak as the corporate officer for the town. From time to time, it is my responsibility to represent the town at tribunals, matters of the courts, and other settings such as this. I'm here to speak about current housing challenges, government policy and strategies, and the manner in which they link to permit 2023 D0001. As a nation, Canada has been grappling with challenges regarding housing. This challenge is acute in some locations, less so in others. Won't dive into the contributing factors, of which there are many. I will note that even though there may not be consensus amongst our elected officials, policy forums, and the general public as to the cause, there is consensus that affordability and availability of housing has become an issue of national importance. Canada has the lowest per capita housing stock in the G7, and Alberta has the lowest within Canada. The Edmonton CMA sits 8% below the national average. An argument exists that the challenge is one of supply. The Government of Canada has created a national housing strategy. This 10-year strategy outlines broad policy and has seen significant budgetary commitments. Currently, the federal government is dispersing $4 billion through CMHC, money aimed at increasing the supply of housing units across our country. Stony Plain will be seeking funds through that program. The Government of Alberta announced Stronger Foundations, Alberta's 10-year strategy to improve and expand affordable housing in November of 2021. Focused on the non-market housing continuum, this strategy estimates a need for 25,000 non-market housing units to be built prior to 2032. In relation to market housing, the Government of Alberta adopted a policy study that includes recommendations to encourage municipalities to update local planning policies and regulations and to encourage the consideration of repurposing non-residential property for housing where applicable. The town of Stony Plain adopted a housing strategy in 2022. This strategy includes provisions and goals to increase both non-market and market housing. Specifically to market housing, the strategy includes the provision to promote innovative housing forms. Further, Stony Plain has had an infill development policy in place for nearly 10 years. Density construction is encouraged through policy and required by the Edmonton Metropolitan Region Board. Simply, housing supply is short, and all orders of government have created a policy structure to address this shortfall. Interprovincial and international migration patterns are predicted to remain high in Alberta. Alberta's population grew by 50,000 people in the first quarter of 2023 alone. This population growth will continue to add pressure to our housing stock. The development permit that's being appealed includes the construction of 89 housing units. Given that we just heard these units are targeted at a very specific demographic, essentially those that have been in the housing market for years, logic would dictate that as these units are populated, other forms of housing are vacated, and therefore open up to others at different stages of life and participation in the housing market. Policy structures being implemented by our national, provincial, and local governments aim to incent and support construction of housing units across the spectrum. Fundamentally, these policies are aimed at increasing supply. And Mr. Chair, this development does just that. That'll conclude my comments. I can certainly answer any questions.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mr. Golin. I will look to the board for any questions. Excellent. Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I will call again to see if there's anyone else in favor of the applicant that would like to speak. Anyone else in the gallery in favor of the applicant that would like to speak? So seeing none, we'll move on to the next phase, and I would ask if the applicant has any closing comments that they would like to present to the STB. Thank you. I'd like to ask, does the appellant have any closing comments that you'd like to provide to the board?
I have to agree, Mr. Chairman, that housing is very important this day. And senior housing is very, very important to all the people in Sunrise Village, where the average age is approximately 80 and are independent living there. I have nothing against the senior development. I just don't want it next to me there, which could cause my village a lot of problems. Of all the places in Stony to put a six-story seniors complex, even in the area, most of our residents have moved into Sunrise Village because of the proximity and because of the walking distances. I can understand why it's necessary, but I just cannot understand why it had to be in a slough that they were going to build this six-story building. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So at this time, I will ask the Subdivision Development and Appeal Board if they have any other questions of the Development Authority, the applicant, or the appellant. I will remind you, once we close the hearing, there is no additional information that we are able to source, that we are able to access, that we can then use for our decision making. And therefore, I want to give one final opportunity for any questions, again, to the Development Authority, the applicant, or the appellant. Yourself? Okay. Excellent. I do just have two quick questions, and I believe both of these will be for the Development Authority. I'm looking first at page 12 of our package, and it's in regards to parking. There's a comment made in here, and the sentence says, "This development would be situated next to a significantly large parking facility which has capacity." Can you provide the evidence in regards to the has capacity comment? So I would assume we would know the number of required parking stalls based on the square footage of the current commercial development, how many stalls that would require, and then how many stalls currently exist.
To you, Mr. Chair, the statement of capacity is more referring to the study that was done with respect to parking and available parking in the area. So it fluctuates throughout the day, and there's often times where there are dozens, if not several parking spots that are available to be used. So that's what the term capacity is referencing there, more to do with the impact study and the parking counts and traffic counts that were done as part of that study.
Excellent, thank you. And so I will ask the question, is the Development Authority aware of any prior variances in respect to a reduction in parking for the existing commercial units?
To you, Mr. Chair, no, I'm not aware of any myself. But again, a comprehensive review of the existing lots and their corresponding parking spaces was not completed. We were looking at the subject site and the parking provided for that use on that site as part of this review.
Excellent, thank you very much. And then one last one for the Development Authority. This is page 14 of the package. It's the development permit that was conditionally approved, and it is under item number 5. It says the proposed building must conform to the land use bylaw C3 district regulations in which the lot is located, as well as section 3.10.1 yards and projections into yards. My understanding is that this development permit, as listed on page 1, is for a land use district of C2, general commercial district. Is this an approved, I guess, a Development Authority approved modification, or is this a typo and it should actually say C2?
To you, Mr. Chair, that is a typo. It should say C2 district. If the board finds it in its wisdom, it could potentially vary that condition to articulate the correct district.
Excellent. So as a part of this hearing, the board could make the correction to that to C2.
Correct.
Okay. Excellent. And I believe. So I believe that then. Sorry, I do have one more question. And again, this was kind of brought up, and I know we did have a little bit of answer, but looking, again, just for clarity. We'd heard this evening, this is through to the Development Authority, we heard this evening about some, I guess you'd call them, variances at the time that Sunrise Village was developed in regards to allowing stormwater runoff from Sunrise Village onto this adjacent property. With the development of this adjacent property, has that runoff from Sunrise Village been considered in the stormwater management plan for this new development?
To you, Mr. Chair. So I'm not aware of any approvals provided by the town that would allow drainage to flow into someone else's private lot. That's not the practice that is typically taken, highly atypical, I would suggest. I would say that we did review some of the, we have some LiDAR imaging which shows depressions in soil and where water is channeling, and I can confirm that some water is channeling through the subject site from Sunrise Village. Actually, perhaps I can show an image. So the blue line that you see, though it is somewhat faint, apologies, is showing where some water flows. And so obviously here we have Sunrise Village, and you can see some waters flowing to the east. What's important to note is that it is the responsibility of this private landowner to accommodate their own drainage. It is inappropriate for them to be draining onto the subject site. I would also note that ultimately, all of this water ends up in the right-of-way. So the town would have no objection to them rechannelizing to go directly into that right-of-way. That is the natural course that it takes anyhow. It is likely the result of many decades of the land being undeveloped, that these patterns could have emerged. But there's a relatively easy, simple fix to simply redirect north, as this is where the water is moving anyhow.
And just for clarity, then, that would be the responsibility of the Sunrise Village property and not the newly developed property?
Correct.
Okay. And then again, without any previous approval, that's any documentation to show any previous approval that was provided, even though there may have been an understanding at a time that that drainage into the adjacent property was acceptable at the time, under current regulation standards, that is not acceptable for that water to drain onto an adjacent property, and therefore it would be the responsibility of Sunrise Village to mediate that.
That's correct. It's not the responsibility of this landowner to accommodate drainage for another site. They're responsible to accommodate the excess runoff for what their development will create. That is their responsibility, not to be in care and control of other people's parcels and runoff that they're creating. So your statement would be correct. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I believe that was my last question. So I'll just ask one more time of the board. Are there any additional questions for the Development Authority, the applicant, or the appellant? Mr. Mons?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through the chair. For the Development Authority, I just would like you to review for us, you made a comment and discussed earlier about the civil engineering reviewing that occurred. So you went above and beyond in preparation for this particular project. Could you just recap that for us, please?
Sure, through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Mons. So typically the process for the town of Stony Plain is to receive a development permit application which proposes a building, let's say. At that time, we require conceptual level information on their servicing plans for the area. That's mainly to understand the feasibility And sometimes it may dictate changes to the development permit application if certain things aren't feasible. So we do, in a sense, a cursory review of their servicing to make sure that we understand that the site plan we're approving is going to work. In this case, because of some of the concerns with stormwater in particular, we did a more extensive and more of a, I guess I would say, we reviewed essentially in tandem both the development permit application as well as the civil engineering because we did have concerns about the lock grading on site, drainage patterns for the area, and how that may or may not affect neighboring parcels as well as Highway 16A. So in this case, they already have their approval from Alberta Transportation, and our civil engineers have already reviewed and approved their design.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Weingarten?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the Development Authority. Could you show that slide again, please, of the drainage? Okay, so the Water Act requires a downstream landowner to accept the natural flow from upstream. Now, it seems to me that through the Sunrise Village, that looks like a very natural drainage pattern. Is the drainage pattern going across the proposed development, is that a constructed ditch?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Weingarten, it is not a constructed ditch.
So that's a natural drainage pattern?
I'm not particularly familiar with how the drainage pattern has developed over the years. It would appear that since this parcel was undeveloped, it was probably the last consideration for drainage for the area. And as such, over time, it appears the water has started to move into that area. I'm not sure of the complete history of how that pattern has developed. But again, I would reiterate that they are not responsible for accommodating adjacent landowners' drainage. The water pattern overall for the area moves to the north, not to the east. And as such, it should be directed there.
Be that as it may, that's a natural drainage pattern, and I would suggest that the Water Act disagrees with your assessment.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Weingarten, I disagree with that interpretation. I think the overland pattern for the area is to the north. It's quite clear, in fact, that it moves to the north and then to the west. And as such, it's my determination or my opinion that it should not be flowing to the east.
Further question?
Yes, please. Going back to building height setback, page 12 of our package, it states there that a 6-story building is what is typically permissible for high-density residential developments in the R8 district. Is that a typo again, or should that be C2?
Through Chair to Mr. Weingarten, that is not a typo. 6 stories are permissible for high-density developments in the R8 district. 20 meters is what's permissible in the C2. You could often see a 5 or 6-story building potentially, depending on several factors. Ceiling height, construction materials could be possible in the C2 as well. So, if you will, it could say C2 or R8, perhaps.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else, Mr. Weingarten?
No, that's it. Thank you.
To the rest of the board, any further questions? And then again, I just look for a little bit of clarity. On the land use bylaw itself, are you able to provide any history on how long the 20-meter height allowance on a C2 district has existed?
To you, Mr. Chair, not off the top of my head, but I could find those numbers for you. The land use bylaw of 2003 had this area designated as commercial, and I can endeavor to find what the height regulation would have been for that district at the time.
How long would that take you?
Give me 5 minutes.
Excellent. And so I'll just look to the clerk. Are we able to, I guess we would probably still need to have the gallery here to receive that answer, correct? Okay, so we will just take a quick, we'll allow the Development Authority to have a look for that answer. Would it be okay for me to proceed with asking in regards to fair hearings at this time?
Through the chair, I would suggest we wait until the Development Authority has provided your response.
Excellent. We will have a quick wait then for that answer.
To you, Mr. Chair, I don't believe I have a digital record of the bylaw in front of me, so I would have to either consult legislative services for any records that they may have, or I would have to go to our archives and look for a paper copy of the bylaw, so it may take longer.
Okay. I do feel that that answer is relatively important in regards to a decision on the matter, and therefore I will call a recess then at this time to allow you to go locate that answer.
Through the chair, if I may, if you could call a specific time for the recess so that the gallery can know when they need to be back.
Okay. Look to the Development Authority. Do you feel that 15 minutes would be appropriate?
Thank you. 15 minutes will work, yeah.
Excellent. So we will call a 15-minute recess. We will reconvene at 8:15. Very much for that short break there so we could get an answer to the question. So we're back in the meeting here, and I will just repeat the question, and then I will ask the Development Authority for the answer. So for the C2 zoning, the maximum building height is 20 meters. The question that I asked is if the Development Authority could advise how long that the C2 zoning has had that 20-meter height allowance applied to it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The land use bylaw 2654 LUO 15 was approved in 2015 and had a height limit of 20 meters for the C2 district.
And then as a follow-up on that, was that a change from the previous version of the land use bylaw?
To you, Mr. Chair, there was a change at some point. I'm not sure exactly when. I can tell you that the ASP that I referenced from 1994, the land use bylaw at that time was land use bylaw number 1166, and at that time, an equivalent zone, something similar to the C2, the height restriction was 10 meters.
Okay. And that was back in the amendment of 1994?
Correct.
So then at some point in time between 1994 and 2015, there was an amendment in the maximum height for the zoning of that property.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I will just look to the board one more time quickly. Are there any additional questions for the Development Authority, the applicant, or the appellant? Seeing none, thank you very much. So to the appellant and the applicant, do you feel that you have received a fair hearing this evening? Yes? Thank you. Okay. So in accordance with provincial legislation, the board is required to hand down a decision within 15 days from the date of today's hearing. No decision is binding on the board until it issues a written decision. Before I excuse the gallery, I'd just like to thank everybody for attending this evening and providing us with all the input that you have. I hope this evening that you've received maybe some answers to some questions that you've had, and we definitely have received a significant amount of information that we will consider in making our decision. So we really appreciate your attendance this evening and everything that you've brought forward. So with that, I will close the hearing and excuse the gallery. Thank you very much.